Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prose podcast, your go-to source for the art, the craft, and the business of publishing. I'm Tally Shamus.
And I'm Lauren Kahn. We're both literary agents, agented writers, and attorneys. And as industry professionals and book lovers, we're pulling back the curtain on an industry known for being opaque.
And today's episode is an absolute must-watch for any querying writer out there. The resources we are going to share will absolutely blow your mind, I promise. We are so thrilled to welcome Alyssa Matesic and Patrick McDonald onto the show today. Alyssa is an independent developmental book editor and publishing consultant specializing in adult fiction. After holding editorial roles at Henry Holt Company, an imprint of Macmillan, the Book Group Literary Agency, and Ballantine Books, an imprint of Penguin Random House, she founded her own editorial services company, which helps hundreds of authors per year strengthen their manuscripts for publication. She shares writing and publishing insights to help aspiring authors on her popular YouTube channel at Alyssa Matesic and newsletter Chapter Break. Patrick McDonald is the creator of QueryTracker and QueryManager, which are the industry-leading online querying tools. He has been bringing agents and authors together since 2007. This gives him a unique perspective since he has worked extensively with both groups and understands the needs and expectations on each side of the query trenches. Patrick started as an aspiring fiction writer when he found the query process lacking proper tools. At the time, he was working as a software engineer and decided to take his two passions, programming and writing, and combine them to create QueryTracker. When it became an instant success, no one was surprised more than Patrick. He lives in Billings, Montana, surrounded by his 3 adult children and 5 spoiled grandkids. Alyssa and Patrick's book, The Modern Guide to Querying Literary Agents, is available for pre-order now and will release August 25th. We'll include a pre-order link in our show notes. Pat, Alyssa, we are just thrilled to have you join us on the show today.
Thank you, Tally.
Thank you so much.
Of course. So you have your Modern Guide to Querying Literary Agents releasing on August 25th. How exciting. Why don't you start by telling us how this book came about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really came from Pat and I connected, and we're talking about how both of us support querying writers in various ways. So myself through my developmental editing business and also through my YouTube channel, which educates aspiring authors on the traditional publishing process. And then, of course, Pat is well known for creating QueryTracker and QueryManager, which basically any querying author touches when they're going through their querying journey. So we connected and we're just chatting about, like our interactions with authors and things that we wish that they had, resources, support that we wish they had, because so many writers are navigating this for the very first time and kind of flailing. Certainly, I had no idea how the publishing industry worked until I worked in it myself. So I just really empathized with their position, and as did Pat as a former querying author. So when we connected, we just discovered that there were so many questions that we both were getting from authors all the time, countless emails. What do I put in the email subject line? Can I requery agents? How do I write a query letter? What is a query letter? And we thought, I wish there was just a book, a place, a resource we could direct all these authors that had all of those answers for them. And it really didn't exist. So we decided that we would try to create it. So that's what we've done.
That's amazing. And how did you decide what to include in this, Pat? I guess that came from, seeing the website, the back end. Do you ever look at queries and look at what writers are doing right, maybe what they're doing wrong?
I do. So QueryTracker's been up for almost 20 years now, and I've been getting emails from authors from the very beginning with questions about how do I do this, how do I do that, and I've been keeping a record of them because I get the same questions over and over. So I've started to have canned responses that I can send out. And after I got 30 pages of that, I'm like, boy, this should be a book.
I think it's so smart. I'm so excited for you to get this into people's hands. Like, I just think it's the resource that we've been missing.
Mm.
We both, not only are we agents, but we have queried multiple times, each of us. So we are very familiar with the process, but we're also familiar with how vague it is. And I'm wondering, and maybe you don't have an answer for this, but I'm wondering if you know why that is. Like, why is the publishing industry so opaque? Like, why hasn't there been a book created about querying? You know what I mean?
Actually, I've wondered the same thing, and I've discovered something while we were going through the query and publishing process. So we wanted to write a book that was the what to expect when you're querying. Because
That's
when we
amazing.
looked at
Love that.
other books on the subject, they always had so much more in them that was not query related. They talked about marketing and what to do after you get your book published. And I even seen one that's like, well, how do you get health insurance once you're a published author? It says, why is this in a book about querying? And then we found out. We started querying this book, and we had an agent say it's too niche. You got to make it more broad.
Right.
Right?
Mhm.
And we had publishers tell us the same thing. And we said, no, we don't want to go more broad because then we can't talk as much about querying as we want to.
All the
Mm.
nitty gritty
And
stuff.
yeah, and that was really
Know,
eye-opening. It says, well, that's why there are no other books out here like this.
Oh.
That's so interesting to me because I agree. Like, I have, I have all the books. I have, what to do when you get a book deal, blah, blah, blah. And you're right. The querying section, it's a couple pages, which
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but for most people, querying takes years. I
exactly.
mean,
it's
years.
the hardest part.
Yeah.
It is. It is the hardest barrier of entry. And so I'm wondering, are you able to share maybe the outline of like what people can expect from this book?
Yeah, we broke it up into 8 steps.
Yeah, I have it.
Oh, show
Um,
us the cover also.
Gorgeous.
Oh, love it.
oh. So yeah, we wanted to make it extremely actionable. Like, what exactly do you need to do? So we have the 8 steps here that take you through preparing your manuscript for querying. So that's the first step. That's the part that, I'm super passionate about as someone who comes from an editing background. That portion is called, wait, are you really ready to query? So, you know, so many authors are unsuccessful in the querying process because they're querying way too soon, which a lot of agents also talked about and gave us insights on when we were gathering data for this book as well. And then we take you through writing the query letter, writing a synopsis, finding the right agents and creating a list of agents you want to query, sending and tracking your queries, then making sense of the responses. What is a form rejection versus personalized rejection? Should you tailor your strategy based on that? Then going through what happens on the agent call if you have multiple offers, and finally considering other publishing options beyond traditional publishing if it doesn't work out. So we tried to cover absolutely everything we could.
That sounds
Yeah.
incredible. And, I've been curious, Pat, since you mentioned that you had this list of questions. So I have two follow-up questions, I guess. Because you've been collecting this data for so long, have the questions evolved over the years? And what are some of the most common ones you see coming up?
Some of them have changed because of the way people query now. 20 years ago, I had to answer questions about self-addressed stamped envelopes. So things have changed there. Um, but a lot of the common questions are, how do I nudge, or what's a nudge?
Well, and it's hard, in an industry where it's not really standardized because personally, as an agent, I don't mind getting a nudge every month, but I know that some
Yeah.
agents
Right.
want 4 months in between. So how did you take that into consideration? Just all the idiosyncrasies.
Well, we have a lot of disclaimers in there that, okay, this is going to be different for every agent, but basically it's kind of like this. And we try to tell them, you know, where to look on agents' websites to find those answers.
Mm,
And if the agent doesn't put that on their website, then you can probably assume this, things like that.
I would also
right.
say our survey. So we surveyed hundreds of
Mhm.
agents as part of the process of writing this book.
Wow.
And in those surveys, we asked a lot of those, questions that agents have different answers to. Like, how often do you send personalized responses is one that comes to mind. Some agents send, that's part of their process. They try to send personalized responses when they can. Other agents never do. And that was one of the statistics that was really interesting to see because that's something that a lot of authors get hung up on. Thinking a form rejection means it wasn't read, or thinking a form rejection means their book was terrible. And no, that they can see now in the book. No, that's just a high percentage of agents just always send form rejections. So we also tried to gather data and statistics as much as we could to give authors that insight into how agents approach the process, given that it is so unique and individual to each particular agent.
That is amazing. I love that science-based approach. I think that's going to really benefit your readers. So good.
Oh, I'm so excited about this. What do you think is the most important thing, like, for our listeners to hear about querying? Like, is there like this number one tip that you just feel like people are missing that they can take away from this episode?
That it's really, really hard, and don't give up.
It is.
But
It
that it
is.
is
Well,
possible. I mean, we have success
Yeah.
stories also
yeah.
as a part of this
Oh,
book,
love
which is
that.
so important to us.
Yeah.
We pulled successful queries that Pat does a great job on his site of spotlighting. He has a whole archive of query
Love
letters that have
those.
gone through, the QueryTracker website. And we reached out to some authors to hear their stories. I think some of them have even become best-selling authors. And they were just, in the quote unquote slush pile, don't love that term. And now they're on bestseller charts. Like, that's what I want authors personally to take away from it, is that yes, it's hard. It's extremely difficult. It's grueling. It's time consuming. But I think there's a lot of cynicism in the industry today that really makes me sad, because when I worked in the industry, the parts that were so rewarding to me were seeing the debut author get picked out of the query inbox. You know that, story as agents yourselves, and then see their dreams come true. And I've seen it happen. We all here have seen it happen. And when you're in the thick of it, you can lose sight of that and say, oh, well, I'm not famous. I don't have a famous TikTok, so I'm not going to get a book deal. It's not true. And that's another statistic we put in this book as well. So it's absolutely not true. Going through the standard querying process, grueling as it is still a way for you to reach your publishing dreams.
I love
And
that.
do you have the chart in front of you, Alyssa, of the number of queries authors had to send out? I can't remember the numbers off the top of my
Yeah,
head,
that's a great one.
but we took all that data from QueryTracker with millions of queries, and we found, okay, how many queries did you send out before you got an agent? And what percentage of it was over 100 queries?
Yeah, it was at least 20%.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was a high number that had to send out over 100 queries.
And you have to think a lot of those queries that are being sent out, the majority come with rejections. And, so
Yeah.
to persevere in this industry.
99 of them at least.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You really need to have a thick skin, and it's tough.
Right.
So, giving writers resources like your book, I think, is so important, especially when they come with encouraging statistics as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you asked before about common questions I get. One of the sad ones I get from time to time is someone will email and say, I sent out a query to an agent 7 months ago and I haven't heard back. When can I query another agent? I'm like, no, you don't.
Oh, no.
Don't send them one at a time.
Although we did just recently have a writer on our podcast who said she queried one by one and she was successful.
So
she's incredible.
Yeah, don't recommend.
Don't recommend. No.
Okay, so I have the chart here, which is 21.3% of authors had to query 100 or more agents before getting their offer. So that's about a quarter.
Yeah. And that's another thing we try to do in the book is tell people, it's going to be hard, but it's not impossible.
Yeah. It's true. And one thing, so Alyssa, I absolutely adore your YouTube channel. I think I've probably watched all your videos, and I really love the tailored feedback that you give, I think, to your Substack subscribers in terms of, your opening pages reviews. One of the questions I get most often is, what part of a querying package matters most? Your query letter, your synopsis, or your opening pages? And you were at Penguin Random House, you're at the book group, so you have a ton of experience as well. What is your opinion on this question?
Well, I'm curious to hear both of yours as well as agents. But so my answer is, thinking about the process of reviewing queries, which is what I did when I was at the book group, and what is going to take you to the next step. And like considering how fast as well that queries have to be reviewed, I would say query letter has to be at a certain level to kind of get you to the sample pages. Though I have heard some agents go straight to the sample pages, so that's why I am curious to hear your responses to this, as agents yourselves. But at least my process was review the query letter. If it sounded enticing, if it was professionally written, if the description is the most important part of the query letter, I think. If that pulled me in and it sounded like it was gonna be something up the agent's alley, that would bring me to the sample pages. And then the sample pages, if they didn't make me want to read more, then that would lead to a pass. If, I get to the end of the sample pages, I forget I'm even reading and I'm like, I need to know what happens next, that's going to be what gets a request. So I would say query letter is kind of the first door. Like it has to be strong enough to get someone to the sample pages, and then those sample pages have to be really, really, really strong.
I think I agree generally with that. For me, a good query letter will definitely get me to look at the sample pages. I always start with the query letter. If the query letter is not, properly formatted or really convoluted, but I understand what the premise is and the premise hooks me, I will still go to the sample pages. So a poorly written query letter, and I say that with air quotations for anyone listening, is not necessarily a deal breaker. Really, the opening pages for me, similar to what you said, are where the importance lies.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of the synopsis, I find the synopsis is more crucial for me in certain genres. So, for example, I am dying for a good thriller. And I want to know in a thriller if the twists are worth it, if there's a payoff there. And there have been, some thrillers that I've received where the pages are well written. The query letter obviously got me there, but then I look at the synopsis and it's just too much work in the rest of the story to bring it up to speed. You get to the end and it's something like she was in an asylum this whole time and everything was just in her head. And that is just a structural flaw, in the entire book. They can't be fixed. So I think that's kind of how I approach it. Lauren, what about you?
Yeah, I like to think about reviewing my query inbox like I'm going into a bookstore. So probably similar, Alyssa, where I start with the query letter, but I imagine I have hundreds, thousands of books to choose from. I honestly usually skip over the metadata and kind of just go right to that, like that concept premise paragraph. And if I'm hooked, then maybe I'll peek at the comps. And if I'm like, ooh, okay, these are also some comps that like of books that I love. And then at that point, yeah, I maybe as I'm in a bookstore, I would kind of like start paging through the first few pages. And if I like the writing, I like where it's going, I'll usually request pages. So this is where I then am different from Tally. When it comes to thrillers, I don't like to read the synopsis until maybe if I'm about halfway through, like say I request a full and I get halfway and I'm just like, it's just not really working for me, but there's something about it. I might then peek at the synopsis just to be like, okay, can they bring it home? And the reason why is because so one of my clients is a literary thriller, and I'll never forget reading their full in a nail salon and my jaw just dropping when I came to the twist and being like, yeah, I have to talk about this with someone. And if I had read the synopsis, I would have known the whole time. And I think I would have missed that kind of like, oh my gosh, feeling. But it depends. I think that's like particular to thriller. But yeah, I just to kind of summarize though, I think the query letter really has to be tight for me. Like it really has to draw me in. We get so many of these query letters. I don't think authors realize like thousands. And so we don't, have an hour to spend on each one. We're just like pouring over it. And so I always say, like, don't give the agent a reason to say no.
Yeah.
Just do your best, your absolute best. Pick up a book like this, do your research online, and just really make it as strong as can be and make it professional.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think that also the way that we review query materials varies based on not only what stage of our career we're at, but what our inbox looks like. So, for example, Lauren already has, quite a full client list. She hasn't been open to queries too often lately. I think you're open now, Lauren,
I'm
right?
open now. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm closed now because I just recently opened, and Pat, you can see the disaster that is my query manager. I have about 2,000 queries that I am trying so hard to get through, but that was in the span of one day at first, and then I closed because I didn't expect to get 1,000 queries in a day, and then I reopened for a few more days about a week afterwards, 2,000 queries. So, I would love to read an entire manuscript and hope that the ending is worth it, but I just don't have time for that. I need to take a look at that synopsis and see, is it worth it for me to dive into this and see whether the author can really, whether they have writing chops, essentially. So it really varies, I think. Yeah.
I'll say a lot of agents now are just opening the first couple days of every month or something to
Mhm.
alleviate that. I wish they would spread it out a little more, though. Because
That's a
everybody's
good
the
point.
first 7 days. Somebody needs to be the
Last, yeah,
the
last,
second week of the month and things like
right.
that.
That's actually a really great point. And Pat, I'm interested, are there any other trends you're seeing among agents specifically?
Well, there's the AI thing.
Mm,
Everybody's putting up no more AI. They
yeah.
don't want to see it.
And that's another question I think we get quite often. Are you seeing an influx of queries because of AI? So, how would you say the number of queries posted to the site in general has shifted over the years?
I haven't seen a big boost recently
Mm.
that I could point to as saying that it's AI. I do get a lot of emails now from people saying, "What do you mean by AI?" You know, I only used it to rephrase some of the sentences because they weren't really good. Is that considered
Mm,
AI? I says, yeah, that's
yeah.
considered AI.
Ugh, and I think that it's really important that querying writers understand that AI is not accepted in the publishing industry at this time. We hear about all these controversies like Hachette with Shy Girl, and it's just there are some writers who are saying publishers are embracing AI. They're turning to AI tools and whatnot, but it is really not accepted in this industry. And I think that
Mhm.
writers need to understand that you cannot copyright AI material. So it cannot be sold. Therefore, it is really important that you're not using AI to, rephrase your materials or in any sense related to the generative process of writing.
And I
Yeah.
think agents are attuned, even if, you use it to write your query letter.
Yeah.
It will write a query letter for you. Now, is that query letter good? I'm
It's
not
going to
sure.
sound like everybody else's query letter.
Yeah, it's gonna have, like, those tells that now agents are and anyone in
Yeah.
the writing industry are very attuned to.
Yeah. Now, on the other
Yeah.
side, I've heard rumors, I don't know if they're true or not, of agent or two using AI to sift through their slush
I
pile.
have heard this rumor as well.
I don't know if
Oof.
it's true or not. If it is true, it's just as wrong, in my opinion, than using
Yeah.
AI to write your book.
It
It's wrong
is.
on both sides.
Yeah.
No, it's horrendous. Agents should not be using AI and writers should not be using
Yeah.
AI, period. And it's not for the creative industry, there are some industries that AI can benefit, like in the medical sphere, for example, but it's not for creative endeavors. These are, we're sitting down to write books because we have an idea, because we want to put a small bit of ourselves on paper, really, and share that with other people. It's a way to exhibit empathy when you read a book because you're getting into someone else's head. You can't get into an AI chatbot's head.
Any form of art should be about the human experience. I mean,
Exactly.
I see the same things happening in photography, which is a hobby of
Mm,
mine.
yeah,
Too much AI slipping in there too.
yeah.
That's a great point. It's like anyone who's using AI to write their career letter, to write their book, think about, would you go to the Met and walk around and like admire the art at the Met
Yeah.
and not knowing that it was all created by AI, be okay with that? And then if you leave the Met and you're like, find out, oh, by the way, all of that was AI created, you would just be okay with that? I
Yeah.
don't
Mm,
think
I'd be
so.
disappointed.
I'd be very disappointed.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. And, getting back to the query letters, I've been seeing some query letters that are formatted quite strangely.
Yep.
And it leads me to believe that those might have been created via AI. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm not an AI detector. But I just want to urge querying writers to stick to, the typical format where we have the metadata, the 3 narrative paragraphs, the author bio. You can flip around the order, but I'm getting these query letters that have headings or are, formatted very strangely. Alyssa, I don't know if you've seen that also with the submissions you've been getting. I don't know where it's coming from.
I think headings are a very strong sign of AI. It loves to create these narrative
Yeah.
like chapter headings for every paragraph. But yeah, I think also the a concern with, using AI, not just for generating text or generating a query letter, generating a story, is like using it for information in general about publishing, is that it could be quite outdated because it's relying on the archive of information online, right? And we don't know, what sources it's using or how old those sources are. And as Patrick and I discovered throughout the research of our book, there's just not a lot of up-to-date, like, this is how things are done today in the querying world, in the publishing world. There's not a lot of information out there from big name websites. So what it's pulling could be, I don't know, information that made sense 5-10 years ago, but not right now, because a lot of those conversations are happening on social media or just within publishing communities. And it's not, someone creating an article, how to write a query letter by this website that AI is going to scrape, right?
Yeah.
So you
Right.
don't want to necessarily trust everything, that all the advice that it's giving you.
Yeah.
Well, you using the word trust makes me want to say to our listeners another thing. This is an industry built on trust. It's an industry built on good faith, just as we're having faith that you didn't plagiarize your novel. We're having faith that you didn't use AI to write your novel, because we can't always tell. It does slip by. It has slipped by me recently, and that was a breach of my trust. And so when you're trying to develop a relationship with an agent and then ultimately an editor, you don't want to start off with a breach of trust, because that sours the relationship from the beginning. And if it comes out later, it's not going to be great for you. So this is just a call to our listeners. Just don't do it. Even if you think, they're not going to tell. Like, I really just don't think they'll be able to tell. Even if we can't tell, it comes out eventually. It's a breach of trust. And so this is the urge to just don't do it. Just write. Pick up their book and figure out how to do it. On that note, about just getting back to your book, does the book cover how to find comps at all? Because that's another
I was going to
thing
ask that.
I feel like people are constantly writing to us. My book doesn't have comps. What do you suggest? So yeah.
Alyssa wrote that chapter, so ask her.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah. We do talk about comps and about how important they are, not because, like, the point is not to say your book has already been written. And then, writers that I work with, yeah, it's almost constant. Almost every single writer I work with is concerned about comps, feels like their book doesn't have comps, doesn't know what to do about them. Can I leave them out of the query letter? And what I always say is, try your best to find comps, because the point is not to say my book has already been written. We understand that your book hasn't been written, of course. The point is to say there's a market for this. It can be sold, and that is attractive to an agent, and that is attractive to a publisher. If you say, well, there's absolutely nothing like my book out there, but it's going to be a bestseller, like, that's a much less convincing business case than, I have this book, it has a fresh spin on XYZ, but it would appeal to the same readers of X and Y. Like, now you're making a business case. And I think writers often struggle, especially at the early stages of their career, to separate the art from the business. And querying is kind of the first time that those things are coming together for authors. So that is a huge part of this learning curve for them. And writing the query letter, especially the comps section, I think kind of brings all of that home, and is the first time they really need to think about that. Like, where would my book fit on the shelf? And that's exactly what I suggest authors think about when they're trying to come up with comps. Like, what else would be on this your ideal reader's bookshelf? It doesn't mean that your book is the same plot, or your book has the same setting, or even the same tone. It just means that something about it maybe it's the themes, maybe it's the protagonist has some similarity to yours. There's a Venn diagram there. It doesn't mean there's overlap, like a ton of overlap. There's just a little bit of overlap that makes sense, that helps us understand what conversation your book is entering. And that strong comps are, I think, a very good way to indicate that you understand the market, that you're a smart writer, that you're not just thinking about the art, but also about the business, which is, as much as we love to separate the art from the business, the act of entering and engaging with the traditional publishing industry means you have to marry the two to some degree and understand how they interact. So I always recommend putting in comps. We have guidelines for what comps should be, what they shouldn't be, like, those outlier bestsellers that we see all the time and time again, many from decades ago. Like, don't use those. No more Hunger Games, please, for dystopians. But also places to look, where to actually go, how to tactically come up with comps. I mean, the best way is to read in your genre,
Yep.
browse the bookstore, browse the library. I love, love, love. My personal favorite method is to go on the Goodreads Choice Awards from the past 5 or so years, because not only do you see the winner of the Goodreads Choice Awards, but also all the finalists in that category. And then that can give you a good sense of, okay, these are people's favorite books of the year in my genre. There's also a debut category. So that's a good place to start if you're, aren't necessarily well-read in your genre, but want to get a feel for what people are gravitating to in the recent years.
And I think that's fantastic advice too, especially when authors don't have access to tools like BookScan. So you want to show that your book will perform well, but you don't have the actual sales figures. And I think Goodreads reviews are fantastic. You don't want the books that have 1 million Goodreads reviews, but maybe 100,000, maybe 50,000. I think that's a really great place to start. And it's funny because now in this industry, all of us have had experience and we understand. But I remember when I first started writing, the first book I was writing was a Fey romantasy. And I was trying to come up with comps, and all I could think of is nobody has written a book like this. A Fey romantasy. Nobody has written a book like this, right? Makes so much sense. But I just didn't understand what comps were supposed to do. I thought a comp was supposed to tell an agent, if you don't want to read my entire book, this is what my book was like. That was my understanding. And now I understand, it's a sales issue. It's are you willing to take a risk on this book because you think it'll perform well? And Alyssa, that actually brings me to a question I think maybe you might be able to answer, because I know that publishers, when they're considering acquiring a book, and this goes a bit beyond the scope of querying, they conduct these like backroom calculations on, is this something that's selling well? Do you know what elements go into those calculations? Is it just sales figures? Are there other variables?
Yeah, I mean, when I was at PRH and we were having acquisitions conversations, the P&L, what we would plug into it is what we consider the comps for that book, which may be what was in the query letter, may not be what was in the query letter, it may be comps that we come up with. Oftentimes we would try to look at comps that were within our house, because we have a lot more sales data for that than the sales data we have to pull from BookScan, which is flawed in many ways, and incomplete, I should say, in some ways. So we would always want to come up with in-house comps, and then would use outside, like non-company comps secondarily if we had to, knowing that data was incomplete. It was like a combination of, okay, how did these other books perform that we think are going to appeal to the same readers? Like what is kind of the guesstimate as best as we can make? Everything in publishing there's no knowns. All of these things, this is art. We don't know. Just because we think this book is just like XYZ doesn't mean it's going to sell like that, because of so many variables outside of our control. But that's kind of that's the data piece, the biggest data piece, I would say, that goes into the P&L that we would generate internally. And then the P&L has all these calculations and would spit out, okay, well, if you think it's going to sell this many copies, like these other books, I think we would typically have 3-ish comps. Then, we can pay this much in advance and expect to make a profit. So like that would kind of be our anchor. However, there were times when what we offered was way more than that. And that's just because the editor believed in the book so much. That's like that kind of magic piece of the industry that I think makes it so special, is that as much as we try to be data driven, there is room for, an editor to say, sure, the P&L says we should pay this, but like, I know that this book is like really, really special. Like, let's offer more. And then of course, if you get into an auction situation, those numbers can kind of, get blown out of the water. I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do. As an editor, that's extremely difficult to do, because you have to convince, the publisher, the marketing team, and all the other people who are involved in financial decisions to, trust your editorial instinct. But there are those cases. So I think it's a combination of the comps and what the finance team approves, but then also like the conviction of the editorial, marketing, and publishing teams. And that's the piece that's exciting.
I love that answer so much, because it really marries what you're saying. People are coming to you and saying there are no comps. It marries that mindset where you're like, okay, this is so special, there are no comps. But it also then tells the writer, well, you need comps to get in the door, just to get to the table, But once you get to the table with these comps, then maybe there is that special element. This book hasn't been written before. The editor can feel super strongly about it. And I think I love what you said too about just reminding writers that this is a business, like at the end of the day. And when I go to pitch you to editors as an agent, if I don't have any comps, like they're not going to open the email. If I'm just like, this hasn't been written before, well, they're going to be like, how are we going to do our job? So you're just making everyone's lives easier by coming up with some of those comps yourself. And I love too that you're including in the book the fact that it doesn't need to be this is the exact version of this book, but just different. No, it would sit nicely on the shelf next to this book. If readers of this book might enjoy this book, that's just another way of looking at it that I think writers forget, and they get very hung up on it is not this exact storyline, so there are no comps.
Yeah, exactly. But I also think, there's space. So of course, we don't want to see any more ACOTAR Fourth Wing Quicksilver comps. However, there is space in the log line if you use these, very well-known older media examples effectively. You can include them. For example, Lauren and I, we get pitched authors, very often from publishing houses to come on the podcast. And today, actually, this morning, Lauren, I don't know if you saw the email, but we got pitched a book that was pitched to us as Saw meets Willy Wonka. And so, I was immediately intrigued. And of course, these aren't the comps, that the author probably used. However, if you have a log line at the top saying, in a new take on Saw meets Willy Wonka, and then you say this will appeal to readers of, XYZ, that is super interesting to me. I want to read this Saw meets Willy Wonka book, to be honest.
Yes, that's like, I would almost say like an advanced querying strategy. It's like a, using other media as part of your hook, but understanding that is different from a comp. That's actually part of your premise, part of your hook into the story. You're not actually saying my book is going to perform like Saw, which doesn't make any sense.
But then you also got to be very careful that you don't push the metaphor, and it has nothing to do with Saw or Willy Wonka.
Yeah, it has to deliver. When you're making a claim like that, you gotta deliver.
Yeah, that is very true. And Pat, is that something that you see in queries, or successful queries rather, where, they'll have this premise that hooks you right away?
You're gonna make me pull out the book and look at the data again, because you took all those successful query letters and analyzed them.
Amazing.
And Oh, what were some of the categories? Alyssa, do you remember? What was something they always say? Try to connect with the agent. And so we went through all the query letters and said, yeah, a lot of them, successful query letters, they didn't say, well, we went to the same college or, things like that.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, that's funny. That's something that Lauren and I actually talk about in terms of the personalization. And, sometimes it's easier to just read a query letter that has no personalization
yeah,
because you can get right to the data that matters. Sometimes, if you actually have quite an intimate connection with the
yeah,
agent,
let's
then
see.
it's interesting. But I
Let me
think
see if I see how many didn't have personalization and then
Yeah,
that
what else we looked at.
we have some data on the personalization piece. I always think of it as like it's a nice to have, but if you're
Mm,
gonna have it, do it right and make it meaningful. Like I see a lot of times authors will just they want to personalize it, so they put in there, I see that you're, open to queries in romantasy and my romantasy, okay, like that's not really personal to the agent. The agent well
yeah,
knows what they're open to. So unless you
yeah,
really have something compelling to say, like you met them at an event
exactly.
or you really, really like one of their authors, and make that genuine. Don't just say that.
Exactly.
Then those can be good personalizations, but in any case, keep it brief because to your point, you're scanning this query letter so fast. And, if the personalization takes up the whole first and second, also sometimes authors will kind of butter up the agent, I feel, in those sections, your esteemed career or, I have so much admiration for what you've done. And that's nice to hear, but I think agents don't really need that. They, maybe just
Mhm.
keep it short, brief, and then get to the meat of it because they really are
Exactly.
scanning so quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to
Don't
hear
Yeah.
that all the time. So
Yeah.
exactly. Or if you're new agents like us, people forget to change it. And then we're getting massive sales in the romance genre have moved me. And I'm like, I've sold nothing. So I'm confused with what you're talking about. And then it makes me feel bad. No, I'm just kidding.
No,
Like, who is this supposed to go to?
Yeah.
well, and at the end of the day, for us, it's a business decision whether to take on a writer. Just like for publishing houses, we need to see that there is merit that we can sell their book. And so, for example, I've had writers say, I see you have a cockapoo. I also have a cockapoo. I love cockapoos and I love you as a person because I love cockapoos and I love dogs in general, but I'm not going to make a decision, to represent you based on the fact that we have the same breed of dog.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate the research though. That means they do
Yeah.
genuinely, know who they're
Yeah.
talking to. So I
But
like
the time that they spent analyzing or
Exactly.
figuring out what kind of dog tally he has, or in my case, they'll pull
yeah.
up a tweet from 2 years ago where they're like, "I love that tweeted about loving Djokovic and you were in labor when you posted." And it's, like, so specific where I know they're going through my socials, and if they're doing this for every single agent, it's like, just work on
Yeah.
your query letter. Work on,
Yeah.
like, the stuff
Work
that
on the prompt.
matters. Exactly, versus, like,
Need some
pulling up
more.
this Instagram photo I posted 5 years ago, like, how long did that take, you know?
True.
Yeah.
you feel
Yeah,
like
or
you're being
work on the
stalked just a little.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. A lot.
Yeah. Well, I am curious actually, because you two have written this phenomenal guide, what are some other, craft or guidebooks that you might have turned to in the past that you would recommend?
I love for plotting Save the Cat writes a
Of course.
novel.
Classic.
I love Story Genius for kind of plot and character development as well. I think those are kind of like my classics. I think Before and After the Book Deal is a great resource as well. I think light on the querying section though, so you need our our
Just a few pages. You
yeah,
need to pair them. Yes.
exactly. Yes, but I think with like those, when you're covering the craft and then the business, and then now you have the querying portion, that it gives you a kind of a good sense of the landscape.
Hmm. Yeah, those are definitely great. I love all of them. I've read all of them. They're fantastic. Save the Cat is just, I recommend it to everyone because it's
Mhm.
just so. I actually have a spreadsheet. I mentor quite a few writers, and I have a spreadsheet that breaks down the beats, and you put in,
That's great.
your word count, and it tells you exactly what word count to have all these beats at. And I just think for new writers, that is so invaluable. Like at this point, I don't really need that. I can generally tell when the midpoint is supposed to happen, when all of this, But for new writers, it's really, really useful.
That's the thing too, like with any plotting mechanism, which, Save the Cat is not the only one, but writers will, I'll talk about plotting and then writers will sometimes say, well, I don't want to be so rigid. Like I don't want to follow the exact, like, why are you giving me so many rules? And it's like, well, no, it's not a rule, but it's like, learn the rules and then you can break them kind of thing. Like once you understand the structure, the foundation of the fundamental foundations of storytelling, of course, you don't necessarily need that exact beat at that exact 87%. Like it can be at 60%, or maybe you don't have that beat in your book. That's totally fine. But you have to understand like the broad strokes, like what these tools are doing and how they are creating more effective and engaging stories. And then once you fully understand them, you can play with, of
Yeah.
course, you can play with it. Nothing in writing is a hard rule, but we have these resources to help us better understand the craft so that we can play around um, in, and we can experiment once we know the basics.
Exactly.
Completely agree. And I think what writers sometimes forget is you can't go off and write the book of your heart and put it in a drawer and that's amazing. Like that's incredible. But to enter into the traditional publishing industry, there are rules of genre, there are rules of structure, and it's a game that we've all signed up for and we're all expecting. And if you try to break those rules, you can have a really hard time getting through the door. Like with all this, it's just, it is a business that is set up for recognizing these certain things. And if you don't follow them, then maybe just save that book for you. Like, and that's okay. Like you don't have to write a book to go get it published. That's what we're talking about. But if you just want to break all the rules and write, a, 200,000 words on just your favorite pet dragon. I don't know. I'm just like, just some of the stuff we see in our query inbox, I'm like, this probably didn't need queried. Like you probably could have just write them for you, but
Yeah,
we're talking about publishing.
totally.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, no, and that kind of makes me think of another thing that, writers might try to capture as much as they can. So, you see these queries where this is a fantasy sci-fi thriller with elements of dystopian and horror and you're
And romance.
a romance,
Of course.
every single genre. And it's, I don't know if it's a way to hedge or if it's
Yeah.
that they're misunderstanding, maybe you have a theme, but that's not quite, that your book is now in that genre. And so I think there are just so many factors to querying that writers need to keep track of that. Again, it's just so valuable for them to have resources like this.
Yeah. We talk about genre a lot, actually, as well in one of the early
Awesome.
chapters, because that's another place that writers get really hung up. And I think we talked about comps earlier. It's similar, another place where, this thing I wrote, just not thinking about genre, which, by the way, totally valid. Like, great. If you don't want to think about genre when you write, go right ahead. But then when you're starting to pitch, because what you're doing is you're pitching your book to agents, right? When you're pitching it to someone else, someone who's a potential reader, you need to understand, you need to help them conceptualize where it fits on the shelf. You need to help them understand, because genre, and then a lot of writers are like, well, genre is too restricting. It's not just sci-fi. It's not just like, sure, okay. But readers need to understand what they're getting into. Like with something that is categorized as romance, and I would say mystery too, like there are very specific things you have to deliver, around plot and around resolution in those
Yeah.
genres. And if you're pitching it as such, then a reader who picks that up is going to expect those things. And if they don't have those things, they're going to be disappointed and give you a bad review. So you do need to know what you've written. Now, that doesn't mean that your book can't have, like you said, Tally, like elements, a romantic subplot in a thriller, for instance. Sure, of course, there's plenty of thrillers that have that. Doesn't make them romance, though. Or it doesn't even make them equal parts thriller and romance. It's still a thriller, right? So
Yeah.
you need to we talk, I think, in the book about like, what is your primary genre? Like, figure that out. And then, of course, you can have flavors of other genres. There is a lot of genre blending these days. Romantasy is, the prime example. Horror, I think, is being blended with genres right now in very, very interesting ways. But understand your primary genre. That's going to take you really, really far, because it also, back to querying, affects who you can query, who you should query. I've had authors come to me for querying help who misunderstand their genre or their age category. That's another big one we also talk about in the book. They were querying. I had an author who was querying this book as YA, and I read the first 50 pages in the query package, and I was like, this is not YA. Like, in tone, like, sure, like, one of the main characters was a teenager, the other one wasn't. The other POV character was not a teenager, and the voice and the themes were all mature. And, so I was like, this is not YA. She started querying adult agents and then started getting some traction. Like, so you just need to, and same goes if you're querying, as a thriller, but really it's women's fiction. I think a lot of mistakes are made actually at the genre stage with querying, that hopefully we can help authors navigate better.
Definitely.
An author needs to read, I don't know, 50 books in that genre to really understand it. What makes a thriller a thriller? Why is it a thriller and not a mystery?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're never going to understand the nuance unless you've read a lot of them yourself.
Yeah.
Definitely. And Alyssa, you bring up romance. We have specifically romancing the beat because romance is so important in terms of hitting those beats, in terms of the resolution, the happily ever after. And I guess with regards to the ending, that's something else that I'm seeing. I'm seeing quite a few authors query me with series. And I have this AMA segment that I do on socials every so often. And one of the questions I've received is, I see publishers giving multi-book deals. So why can't I write a series? And, my answer to that is, well, sure, you can have a 2-book deal. That doesn't mean that the second book is the second book in that series. Could be 2 standalones. But what do you touch on this at all in terms of standalone versus series in your book? And what are your thoughts? Yeah. Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we tell them, query the first book.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you can say in the query letter that it has series potential, and absolutely never query the second book. You gotta start with the first book.
Yeah.
And it's difficult if you've not impossible, but if you've self-published the first book and you want to query the second, that becomes very tricky. But like coming out, I think authors have a misconception too, like, okay, well, this is more for them to sell. Sure, but coming out off the gate and saying, I have this trilogy, like, represent this trilogy that has to be published as a trilogy. Well, first off, that's much more risky for them to take on 3 books versus 1 book and then seeing how it does and then deciding, oh, yes, you should expand it to a trilogy. That is more, again, going back to the business, that is a more smart financial decision, less risky financial decision than them saying they have to take the full trilogy right off the gate because the books have to be together and there's no way to separate them. So strategically, if you're deciding between writing a series and a standalone will give you more publishing options. But you can, of course, leave the door open at the end of that standalone for further installments.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Totally.
I think that's exactly what I'd say.
And I think too, sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen. I had an author recently, we was pitched they wanted to do a 2-book deal with her. We brought them a second pitch. They liked the pitch we brought, but they said, do you have something in the first book's universe? And we weren't expecting that. I mean, she had written a standalone, but we thought about it and there were some other really cool characters. So we brought them a second book in the same universe, and that's the one they bought. So you never know if there's room to keep going. But the thing that I always come back to is just don't give an agent a reason to say no. Just don't. And maybe through conversations as you start working together, you see, hey, wait, maybe there's some serious potential here. Maybe that's something we can work into our pitch letter to editors. But if the vast majority of agents are saying, yeah, probably shouldn't pitch a series. Yes, there are exceptions. Of course, there's always going to be exceptions, but the odds of you being the exception are so small. And if you really want an agent, just don't give them a reason to say no.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, Pat, I have a question for you that I've been really curious to ask
No.
because no, it's about the site and the evolution of the site and, where you see it going from here. And do you get pitched ideas? I feel like you probably get pitched ideas quite often.
Well, I hate to turn it back to AI, but I get a lot of pitches from people. You got to integrate AI into the site.
Oh,
No, you
no,
don't.
no, no, you don't.
No, we don't. Yeah. But right now there's QueryTracker and QueryManager, and they're separate for a reason. Because there's a lot of agents on QueryTracker who don't use QueryManager, and there might be a lot of authors querying agents on QueryManager, but they don't want to use QueryTracker, so they're separate. But that gets confusing sometimes for a lot of people. So I would like to, slowly start connecting them more and maybe turning it into one site someday.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Yeah, I would love to be able to see my own query tracker page in terms of at least the little smiley faces. Just to see how I'm doing in terms of
Yeah.
responding to queries in a visual way. But I do really appreciate the statistics on Query Manager. I love to see, how many I still have to respond to. And that's really helpful because just seeing page after page after page of queries is sometimes overwhelming.
I bet.
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
mean, this has just been incredible. The two of you are such a wealth of knowledge. Lauren, I don't know if there's anything else you
No,
wanted to
I'm
ask.
just so grateful. I mean, it's like connecting with celebrities. So thank you so much for coming on our show. I mean, Patrick, you alone, like you've just the name Patrick, I feel like I've seen for years floating on Query Tracker when we were, back in the day when we were in the trenches ourselves. So thank you so much for all that both of you do. I mean,
Thank you.
truly our mission for the show is to make this industry less opaque. And so connecting with people who have the same mission is really important to us. But also, everybody, this book, this is your resource. This is all the questions you've come to us with. Get this book, A Modern Guide to Querying Literary
All
Agents.
in here. Yeah, it is available for pre-order now and launching August 25th. So thank you so much for having us. This was so much fun for us too. This industry can feel isolating at times. We're all kind of, bookworms at heart, and we're all in our own little libraries and, doing our thing. So it's like really, really special when we can connect, and we all have the same love and passion, which is just getting stories out in the world. So hopefully this book and this podcast and all the work that we're all doing together helps uh, get more amazing stories told.
Yes, that is the goal. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. This has been a pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
And thank you all for joining us for the Pros podcast. Remember to check back next Tuesday for a new episode.